rape allegations continue against Bill Cosby as he remains silent, just as quiet as the media when mentioning Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw.
Not only has the protest in Ferguson broken all consistency records, emerging from this has been the brilliantly black, conscious voice of young actor Jesse Williams. Hip-hop artist Kendrick Lamar beautifully states, "I love myself."
Actor-director Tim Reid spits pearls of wisdom to Jackson State University students. I'm Anthony Harris.
And I'm Cleo Monago.
You're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast. Greetings and welcome to the Parallel Realities Podcast. I'm Anthony Harris with Cleo Monago. Cleo, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Much to talk about, as always, on this third edition of the Parallel Realities Podcast. But first of all, there's some videos that you want to make note of.
Yeah, there's some videos that that was sent to me that are both out of Azania, better known as South Africa, that shows an interesting relationship between white people or some white individuals there and Native Africans there. One takes place in a mall.
Who's that capper? Who's that capper? Huh? Who's that capper? Who's that capper? You're hiding. You called you again. Huh? Who's that capper?
I imagine that the white dude will think twice about calling another black man or a black person a kafir. Yeah, there's another video, which I think is fascinating, that takes place on the news set of a show in Azania or South Africa, where a white man has been interviewed, and he clearly has a hard time being respectful and looking at his host with respect and equality.
It's still you versus us.
But can't you understand that we have our own history, our own culture, our own language, our own religion?
From your perspective, Mr. Fisachi.
No.
And it's a very narrow perspective. That's the most unfortunate part of this.
It's not a perspective, it's a real fact.
Do you care about the starving millions of African people in this country?
I care
more. Do you care about the farm workers who are being oppressed in this country? Do you care about the fact...
Don't interrupt me. I'm finished. Thank you. Bye. Take where the shit. Bye.
Okay.
And you won't dare.
Mr. Fisachi,
you won't dare interrupting me once more. Take away this man.
Thank you very much. Touch me, and you'll be in trouble. Touch me on my studio.
You touched me.
Touch me on my studio. Touch me on my studio.
You touched me.
And
take away his arm.
Touch me on my studio.
Take away his arm from me.
Touch me on my studio. Touch me on my studio.
I touch you on your studio.
Touch me on my studio.
I touch you on your studio.
You don't do that.
Yo, don't touch him. Wait.
Let's just go out.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
I am not finished with you.
Mr. Fisachi, stop threatening this woman, Mr. Fisachi. I'm telling you, stop it now. Would you stop it now, Mr. Fisachi?
I won't stop it. You try to stop me.
Mr. Fisachi, why are you threatening this poor woman? What has she done to you? She's expressing her views.
She's talking about the capitalist whites. Why do you think then she is poor?
Yeah, I think it's deep that that dude could not just be respectful of her, and he could not fathom the idea of treating her as an equal and just being there present with her in balance. He had to insist on being in charge of running things and treated like he was better, which he's not, of course. And clearly the woman realized that, but he couldn't take it. So as we can see, a brawl ensued, and he wound up threatening her. And I think that kind of behavior the white guy has is relevant to police brutality and other systems in this country where white people cannot handle or insist on being in charge and being the ones who are superior. And when a black person successfully challenges that, sometimes they wind up dead, like Trayvon and Michael Brown.
Well, just not only probably in those kinds of interactions, it could be in everyday life, at workplace, casual encounters in public. So it's very interesting to see that behavior there, and that's something that people may want to investigate and a little further.
Yeah.
Okay, now in terms of this show, Bill Cosby seems to be all the talk here in the United States, and probably throughout the world, in parts of the world at least, as the number of rape allegations have increased to at least 15 as of this taping, as the most recent woman to allege that Bill Cosby raped her was Janice Dickinson, the former model, Joan Tarshis, and then preceded by Barbara Bowman, who was the very first woman to allege that Cosby had raped her. To date, Bill Cosby has issued no comment. And Cleo, in terms of that issuing of no comment, I mean, come on now. There have been 15 women who have accused him of raping them, and all of these allegations rather are decades old. Some of them going back to as far back as 1969. But he has issued no comment. His image is being tarnished. He's not been allowed to appear on some shows to promote his book or potential sitcoms that may be coming out. What does all that say that he's not issuing any comment?
Well, I have to preface my comments by saying that I think Bill Cosby is only good at doing his shtick, doing his America's Dad thing, which is his script, or going around chastising black people for not acting the way he thinks they should. But when it comes to being responsible for his own behavior, which is not falling in line with the America's Dad image that he's once had, he don't know what to do. And I've never heard him speak well about or directly about things that he's been accused of. I mean, he has a love child allegedly and some other things that has occurred as well that he's never ever referenced. So I think this is just par for the course when it comes to Bill. He doesn't talk well about what he's about and what he's done. And it makes him look really bad to not say anything. I mean, one might think either you did it or you didn't, and you'll say that you didn't do it. But attorneys also can be involved and say, don't say nothing. So who knows? But he's going to have a hard time walking away from this. No, he won't be going to jail for it because of the statutes of, what's it called? The statute of something.
Limitations. The
statute of limitation, because, the crimes are so old. But his reputation is definitely going to jail.
Yeah, well, let's explore this a little bit. Again, there have been at least 15 allegations. To my knowledge, at least the women who have appeared on television are all white. Now, are we tripping, or am I tripping by asking that question? And what does that mean in terms of the dynamics or the psychology of all of this?
Well, I don't think you're tripping. I mean, there's a pattern going on that's race-based. They're all white. So I think, no, we're not tripping. Maybe Bill Cosby suffers from what a lot of black folks, males in this instance, would Hollywood notoriety have been known to do. Chase white women or women that could pass for white under the lights, under dark light.
Well, is there a pathology that Cosby was living inside? Is there a pathology that Cosby was living with or grappling with, and he couldn't quite deal with it? And it was very vile the way he approached these women. It was not out of, hey, I like you, can we hang out? He tricked them and drugged them and apparently did what he wanted to do. So is there some pathology there that Cosby was dealing with?
Well, sounds like it. I mean, he's a married man. He's married to a black woman. But all of his rape victims were white women. There's a clear pathology there. That's race driven, clearly. And I think that he didn't want nobody to know about his white addiction.
Why?
So,
why wouldn't he want anyone to know? I know he's a married man, but I mean, there are situations that can be worked out. Why didn't he want anyone to know?
Bill's reputation, and it is just a reputation in my opinion, just hype, is that he's quote unquote America's dad. He's the poster child for how to assemble the perfect family, which is black in his instance, and he has a reputation to keep going. White girl don't fit in it.
Okay, well, Cleo, have you heard the name Daniel Holtzclaw? Have you ever heard that name before, Daniel Holtzclaw?
Yes, I have. The cop?
Yeah, okay, you have heard the name. Well, surprisingly, right in the midst, well before these allegations against Bill Cosby emerged, back in August, an Oklahoma City police officer, Daniel Holtzclaw, was accused of coercing women to expose themselves. He would touch them inappropriately or used his authority as a police officer to force them to have sex with him while he was on duty. He's currently facing 36 felony charges, 2 days of testimony from 13 women against him. They all appeared in court and testified against him. And actually, the racial makeup of all these women, they're all black. Officer Holtzclaw took advantage of these women. They were in poor neighborhoods. Now, I bring this up because I'm very, very for consistency. Now, we're seeing Cosby all in the media, mainstream media. People are being interviewed, hour-long interviews on shows, Entertainment Tonight stepping in, interviewing people. but no mention in terms of the national media, in terms of Daniel Holtzclaw. Is that surprising to you?
That was a trick question. I know you know it ain't surprising to me. Well, of course, not that course that is surprising because it's not. But of course, that gets no mainstream coverage. There's lots of things that occurs in this country that just gets no mainstream coverage. So no, I'm not surprised at all. But I think it's important that you raise it as you have, that they have no one has said anything, and this is an extraordinary crime. This is, as you said, this is a police officer, law enforcement officer, someone who's supposed to protect and to serve, using his position to rape and control and violate black women. That's deep. And of course, the society is ran by people that are constantly editing, constantly repressing, constantly keeping things at bay that they don't want everybody to know about. And this is an example of that. So yeah, I mean, it's not surprising.
So Officer Holtzclaw will stand trial. And again, there's been no major reference of it. And again, it's just very inconsistent because even in the Ray Rice situation, there were other situations of domestic violence by an Alabama judge, no less. No mention, but everyone was up in arms. I've always kind of had the contention that you can win the dysfunction argument if you put a black face on it. And apparently that seems to be true because, and again, rape is wrong. Violating anyone in any way is wrong. But it again, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago in this video where the woman went all around town and she was catcalled by various men, but it was only the black and Latino men were only showed. Exactly. There's always a slanting of the information, and it kind of forces you to think another way.
But let me ask you this. Have you seen any black people cover this? I mean, have you seen any black press highlight this incident with this cop and these black women?
Yes, I have. And how I actually found out about it was the good work and very good work by MSNBC's Melissa Harris Perry. She brought it to my attention back in August when it first was coming to light. So I saw it on her show. And that's the only reference that I've seen. Now, I don't scour the network news every day. I watch it as much as I can, and I do view it, but I didn't see it to the extent of some of the other coverage, some of the other things that were going on.
Well, Melissa Perry represents that extremely rare phenomena of having black people with talk shows, of course not during prime time, but still on TV at MSNBC. But that's not the black press. That's a black person in the white press, the liberal leftist white press. And I'm not surprised that the likes of her would raise these issues. She's always raising issues that don't make mainstream. But I was just wondering if any other black press had even talked about this issue. And it sounds like no.
Well, I'm sure. Well, from what I've seen, the Oklahoma press has done a good job of it. But no, I've not seen. And again, I don't scour everything and look through it all. But I've not seen it. Not to the extent that anyone can just write a Bill Cosby article and it will get attention. No, I've not seen it to that extent. No.
Yeah, so what could be occurring as well on the black side, and I want us to talk about this because this is more important to me than what white folks do, because all my life white folks have been acting like white folks. What I'm concerned about is black people repressing or not paying attention to these kind of incidences or being so concerned about white approval or getting mainstream access that they also repress and edit what they discuss.
Interesting. Well, we can talk about that, but there's another issue that revolves around that, and that's the Ferguson issue. So let's take a short break, and we can get into that conversation. You're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast.
Black race is founded on 2/3 a person, rapings and beatings and suffering that worsens. Black human packages tied up in strings. Black rage can come from all these kinds of things. Black rage is founded on blatant denial, squeeze economics, subsistence survival, deafening silence and social control. Black rage is founded on wounds in the soul. When the dogs bite, when the bees sing.
Welcome back to the Parallel Realities Podcast. I'm Anthony Harris with Cleo Monago. We're still awaiting the verdict in the Darren Wilson murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, as over 100 days of protests by mostly young people in that area have forced us to this fork in the road as we're awaiting some sort of verdict, and most people think there will be a non-indictment. He will not be indicted for that murder. And as a result of that, Governor Jay Nixon in Missouri issues out of the blue a state of emergency, almost tipping his hand, if you will, letting people know that, okay, we're not going to indict him, and if you do loot or go crazy, we got you. So, Cleo, as you see things unfolding in Ferguson, and what are you thinking as you see this happening, and how things have kind of been tipped in the balance and swayed and skewed, and how do you see this playing out now?
Well, this whole incident has been fascinating. As you and I have discussed many times, it's fascinating because it's lasted so long. And as I also know, we were there, and we got some insight on why it's lasting so long. So it's still a fascinating phenomenon because those people are not playing down there, and they're making up for lost time, meaning that they've been under pressure and dealing with racism and murder and oppression for decades, and found an angle in which to maybe stop that. So they're not playing. And it's real clear that all these appeasements by the Governor Nixon, I think his name is, and their local mayor, don't have them, going anywhere. So, I mean, they also have what's now called the Ferguson Commission, which is supposed to be, in my opinion, the at least fifth appeasement. The first one was when they had the black man who was the cop come in much earlier in this process to bring a black face to that white-dominated system there to try to calm down the natives. So when they announced that murderer is not going to be indicted, it ain't going to be no joke what's going to go down. And I'm concerned about the people there because there was a military man who just reported seeing military-like equipment, including those Jeeps and all this stuff, that they're getting ready. And black people are not valued enough to be protected against this kind of stuff. And I hope nobody gets killed because some people are not playing. Right. And I'm talking about the local citizens who are tired of the racism. And there's similar plans of protest across this country where people are waiting, on edge just to get a blatant message that it's all right to murder an unarmed black child.
Right. And just to back up for a second, the man you're referring to who saw the vehicles in the basement of the hotel in Missouri, Mark Paffrath, Paffrath. I hope I didn't butcher that too much. Mark Paffrath. He took pictures, actually, of these vehicles, these Homeland Security vehicles he saw in the basement of a hotel, and he subsequently got fired as a result of that. And they threatened the fact that he was being a terrorist by putting it on Facebook. So with all that playing out before us, and we just left the previous segment where there seems to be a temerity or a lack of courage, I guess, of black people to call out racism. I think that's where we just left off the last segment. And we witnessed some of that in Ferguson when we were there. What's the point? Why call out? What's being gained by calling out racism, in your opinion?
Well, not calling out racism on a system basis, which occurs every day, leads a lot of black children and former children into questioning their value, their worth. And I think the abstracting of the problem of racism in black people's minds has us turning on each other. There's a lot of misdirected rage because we're not allowed to deal with the source. But speaking of source, and I hope this is not too much of a tangent, but because it's relevant. About a week ago, I was up at about 2 a.m. doing some work, and I went online, and a smartphone video was sent to me featuring this young man named Jesse Williams, the actor on some show on TV called Grey's Anatomy, I think. I've never seen the show. I don't know much about him. Right. A friend of mine named Tyler told me. Right. What was that?
No, I'm just saying. I just wanted to say, it's Grey's Anatomy that he's an actor on the show.
A friend of mine named Tyler, kind of an activist sort, that's a friend of mine, told me about Jesse Williams before and showed me some footage of him. And I was not that impressed, though he is an impressive young man. But man, on this smartphone video that somebody took of him talking, I haven't heard that kind of sharp, brilliant critique and analysis of racism, even of Hollywood, where he's from in terms of his job. He had a crisp and powerful and very accurate counter white supremacy analysis of Hollywood and this impact on how black people are seen and its relationship to the murder of Michael Brown. I mean, he broke it down. I'm extremely impressed with this young man.
We need to hold those who claim to protect and serve us to account, right? Like it's a two-way street, and respect is earned, and there's a reciprocal nature to human society and a real productive civilization. So if people take an oath to protect and serve us, they need to be held accountable for doing that. There are a lot of unanswerable questions, but I do think that what we can start with is trying to get a real grip and an understanding on our rights, right? Understanding what due process really looks like, understanding what probable cause is, understanding what rights you have when an officer rolls up on you.
And I really want to find out what's going to happen with him after Grey's Anatomy goes off the air, because nothing they can do, they meaning the system of like some marginalized those kind of voices, nothing they can do right now blatantly to the man. He's married. Interestingly enough, he's a half-white black man with a black wife who's brilliant and articulate. So he's been a fascinating emergence from this Ferguson fire.
Well, just a little bit more about Jesse Williams. As we said, he's an actor on the Grey's Anatomy television show. In terms of activism, he's also the executive producer of a fine program, a very, very good program that the Schomburg Center in Harlem puts together called Question Bridge. It's comments from black males throughout the country. They've been in Ferguson for quite some time. I suggest everyone to take a look at that. It's some powerful comments and some imagery in some of the work that's being done. But in terms of the conversation that we're having now and how Jesse Williams plays into that, and in terms of the reaction once there's an apparent not guilty verdict from the grand jury, a lot of people have expressed that they hope there's calm. Frances Cress Welsing, someone who I admire, and I'm sure you do as well, she has gone on record saying that she wants there to be calm. The reaction should not be the almost typical looting and emotional reaction. The reaction should be, in terms of her point of view, calm, strategizing, and moving forward. Part of her strategy is a boycott. Boycotting, as we have these holidays coming up soon, some terms of boycott in terms of the products, the goods and services there. What are your thoughts in terms of the reaction? Because all too often, I'm sure you remember Rodney King, reverberations were felt all the way here in New York as they were closing department stores down here in New York once that not guilty verdict was reached. What's your thought in terms of the reaction once there is a not guilty verdict reached?
Well, I'm almost apprehensive to answer that, because when people don't go with the passive recommendation, like Dr. Welsing, who I also have great respect for, advised, they're seen as, rabble rousers. So I might be seen as a rabble rouser in that I think that both should take place. I think black people should show righteous anger. I think black people should interrupt things as they flow, because this is murderous and horrific. And I think people should be in the streets. But I also think that we should be strategically looking at the macro issue in terms of, excuse me, in terms of the fact that, for example, people of African descent in this country galvanized over several $trillions worth of money through the hands of this country. And I think we should back off and collectively boycott these systems that we make rich, who don't care about our very lives. So I agree that we should be strategic and do things like that, but I think we should make some noise too.
Well, clearly,
because being murdered ain't no joke.
Right. Well, clearly you saw the impressive performance by the St. Louis County and the state, really. Once there were protests back in August, they had machinery like they were in Iraq or Afghanistan that were displayed, guys on tanks with impressive artillery. So, and the governor has already issued a state of emergency. So it's clear that if you step out of line, there can be some violence. And again, it may just be normal protesting, no supposed Molotov cocktails being thrown. And I use the word supposed. No signs of attacking police and things like that. So clearly these people who will react in an emotional way, which is to be expected really, they're putting themselves in danger, and we don't want to see any more dead black people, do we?
Of course I don't want to see any more dead black people, but there don't need to be no dead black people. I mean, first of all, the local law enforcement, in quotes, should be demanded they don't hurt nobody. That should be a demand. They have to pay because, well, let me back up. Let me not be confusing. I think that the local police department there needs to be a mandate that you don't kill nobody, that you don't hurt nobody for protesting. Because even Don Lemon, who I think white people love, and he definitely loves them, even he was harassed, and he didn't. And these people, I mentioned him because these people didn't have guns. These people weren't a threat, but they were being disrespected and pushed around. So they should be allowed to protest. They should be allowed to say we don't like it. They should be allowed to be angry in the streets that a murderer gets away with murder. They should be allowed to do that.
Right, and Don Lemon wasn't the only reporter. I think about day 2 or day 3 of the protests, some reporters in a McDonald's in Ferguson were arrested. But let me ask you this: you and I were there. The Quick Trip in Ferguson was burned down, and we have imagery of that. It was burned down, and it no longer exists. Okay, now citizens or people who were quote unquote protesting did that. Clearly there's a concern for property. Maybe, people need to buy stuff in that area. In terms of that, you don't want to see that type of stuff happening, am I correct? Or do you just not care? You want to see some type of...
This is not an issue of what I want and don't want. This is an issue of a response, an appropriate response to rage, an appropriate response to injustice, appropriate response
What is appropriate?
Well, let's look at Quick Trip. Quick Trip is a external money-making business that came into the black community to make money. Quick Trip is not a black business. Now, I'm answering your question. I'm not making any suggestions that people should go tear up stuff. I'm contextualizing why people do tear up stuff. Because you're right, people do need to shop and blah, blah, blah. But rage is never controlled. Rage is an out-of-control response to people being treated badly in this instance, and a reaction. And the rage is justifiable. But I think it's a good idea that people use rage in ways that could have a collective, proper outcome on a long-term basis. But you can't expect people to respond to a murder, to a body in the street for 4 hours, to decades of respect with calm elegance. It's just not to be expected. People go off because, as you know, we were there. It was a powder keg. Yeah. We heard young men talk about what they go through and the normalized state of trauma that they were living with for decades. I mean, so what happened to Quick Trip was a logical response to that condition.
One other thing, as we move along, young activism. We saw that while we were in Ferguson. There was a young woman who was very impressive. Mother was a Black Panther, and she was not stuttering in terms of her Black love, pride, and affirmation. You have come across someone, musically, that you find quite impressive, in addition to Jesse Williams.
We got a young brother that stands for something. We got a young brother that believes in all of us. Brother Kendrick Lamar. He's not a rapper. He's a writer. He's an author. And if you read between the lines, we'll learn how to love one another. But you can't do that. I said you can't do that without loving yourself.
This is a world. This is a world premiere. This is a world premiere.
I done been through a whole lot. Trial, tribulation, but I know God. Satan wanna put me in a bow tie. Pray that the holy water don't go dry, yeah. As I look around me, so many motherfuckers wanna down me. But ain't no me gon' never drown me. In front of a dirty double mirror, they found me. And I love myself. The world is a ghetto with big guns and dick inside. I love myself. But they can do what they want whenever they want, I don't mind. I love myself. You said I gotta get up, like it's more than suicide. I love myself.
Oh yeah. A young brother from my hometown, a homeboy, I found out, because I'm from Compton, he's from Compton, named Kendrick Lamar. I didn't know much about him. I was recently introduced to him by listening to an interview with George Clinton that was at the Schomburg. And the interviewer, which I think was Questlove, asked him who did he admire in terms of today's music. And I'm a huge fan of the genius of George Clinton. And he mentioned Kendrick Lamar, so that got my attention because if George likes him, he must be bad. So I didn't really do any investigation of him after that, but he was on Saturday Night Live recently, and somebody sent me the video of his performance, and I was very impressed with the music, with the production, and with the message of the song, which was about people loving themselves or him loving himself. And it was wonderful seeing a young black man say and articulate, "I love myself." Powerful message, and a very talented artist.
Right. Here's a question I have for you, though, because, again, a lot of people in terms of this Ferguson protest, and because it's mostly led by young people, and they've been on the case for over 100 days. A lot of elders and older folks have issues with young people, from sagging pants to not getting a job, unemployed, standing on the corner, various. We can go on and on there. Is it important that we listen to what they have to say? Because you just said that you didn't know who Kendrick Lamar was until someone shared the video with it. Is it possible that the older generation, we as an older generation, are not really listening to our younger generation, and as a fact of that, they are frustrated, so they're just leading the revolt or the reaction on their own based out of anger at us?
Another dangerous question, dangerous in terms of how I might be seen once I answer it. Kendrick Lamar is not the rule, he's the exception. You know, most black children or children of any background have the kind of genius that he has, we should definitely allow them to be showcased at any place possible. But this is a very dumbed down overall generation. Now, it's a generation that has rage and that can see and hear, and we're human beings who could be tired of being mistreated regardless of our vision and our perspective. But this aside, the first thing that we heard after Obama became president was post-racial. And then we have people like Raven Simone and other people fulfilling that fantasy with their words and being very unrealistic regarding the state of things when it comes to racism and systemic oppression. So I think that the young people don't listen to the older people, frankly. But also a lot of older people are not saying nothing because we come from a generation of being repressed into silence and assimilation. So everybody needs to be listening to each other wherever wisdom occurs. There's some wisdom among older people. In Kendrick Lamar's instance, we get to see that there's also wisdom among younger people, but no group, older or younger, has a real estate on knowledge. It comes from both ends. And we should create a context where we can all hear each other.
Okay. You're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast. Ebola continues to become a story and a major story worldwide as over 5,000 people in West Africa have been killed by the disease. Areas of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. Over 5,000 people killed. It's hard to fathom such a number. Meanwhile, here in the United States, another person has died. Sierra Leone doctor Martin Salia, he contracted Ebola while working in the country. He died in a Nebraska hospital. He had no kidney function, hard to breathe, and he was unresponsive. And apparently they got to him too late. He was a black man, and he died. That brings the number to 2, at least to my knowledge, 2 who have died here in the U.S., both black men. Martin Salia recently, and a few weeks back, Thomas Eric Duncan, who died in Dallas, in a Dallas hospital. And an update on that story, in fact, Mr. Duncan's family has settled a lawsuit with the hospital, undisclosed amount of money, but they have settled, and there have been allegations from some members of his family that the whole way that they dealt with it was racist. You may recall that he told the hospital that he had symptoms, and they sent him home, and he eventually died. Cleo, what are your thoughts on this? And again, I don't mean to keep asking this question, but am I tripping by saying that another black man died and bringing that to light through Ebola?
in a society that's so contaminated by race phenomena, race thinking, and racism and white supremacy myth, no, we're never tripping when we assess a situation based on this racial makeup. And it is powerful for two white people to have been flown to the United States with the same disease, but two black people were flown here with the same disease, black males in this instance, who have died. Now, I'm not saying that in either case it was deliberate. I'm saying that there's a message, whether it's unconsciously recognized or consciously recognized, that implies a lack of human value of black people. And we don't always discuss or realize what the messaging that's hitting our consciousness. And I think that it's important to bring into light that that's a message that could be coming from that these two brothers died. Because nobody white has died in the United States from this.
Well, and for perspective and context, one of the arguments that the medical industry uses is that the vaccine that they use to treat Ebola, ZMapp, they don't have enough of it. So they run out of it, and that's part of the reason. They tell us that's part of the reason why so many people in West Africa have died from it. They don't have enough of it. They have found a way to use it for the white people who've come here and have taken it. However, again, in factual information, there was a black woman, a black doctor, and an Asian woman who also had a black nurse rather, and an Asian woman who also had Ebola symptoms. And they were quarantined, and they've come out, and they were getting kissed by George Bush Jr. and they're okay now. These are people of color nonetheless. So again, are we just being sensitive about that? Is that just indicative of the precarious state of black men worldwide? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm being sensitive about anything. The fact of the matter is, black men are not living with Ebola. That's a fact, and I don't know whether it's deliberate or not. I know what the outcome has been, and there's a message in that outcome that either impacts us unconsciously or consciously. And in quotes, it could be a coincidence that bad things disproportionately keep happening to black men. But I know one thing, I don't buy for a minute that they don't have enough of the treatment. To me, that's like saying we don't have enough flour to make cakes. They could find what they need to find for who they need to find it for, because the elements that are on the planet that are needed to create these kind of treatments. So I definitely don't buy that one.
Okay. Well, another thing just to mention about this, the hospital, Texas Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas, they've started a charitable Ebola foundation in his name, in Thomas Eric Duncan's name, in Africa. So there's some measure of recompense. The whole thing about that, though, is it just too little too late, or is it just covering their backsides? I
don't know. All I know is that brother's dead, and I'm sure he'd rather be here than them having some recompense. If he had a choice here, I'm sure he would have preferred to be saved. And I'm bothered by that he died. And I predicted that he was going to die. And I also predicted that this doctor was going to die when I heard about him. Now, that prediction is not scientifically backed up. I just made the prediction in both instances, and I was correct in both instances.
Right. But your prediction was based on just them being black men?
Yes.
Is it based on what you've been saying all along, or?
It's based on. Look, when I make these assumptions, I could be wrong or right, and I've been wrong on other topics before in my lifetime. But when I predict what's going to happen to black men in many instances, it's been correct. I also predicted that those women that you mentioned would not die.
Some family members, and I mentioned it just a little while ago, some family members from Thomas Eric Duncan's family, I believe a female relative, she has used the R word, saying that racism led to his death. And you may recall that I believe this week or a couple of weeks ago, the Michael Brown's family has said that they feel that racism led to his death. They actually, in fact, were in Geneva, over in Europe, in Switzerland, talking about the death and the continual killing of black men, unarmed black men by the police. So there are instances where people are coming out now and saying, racism has something to do with this, and there's no stuttering involved. Do you find that somewhat refreshing, especially based on your point of view? Do you find that refreshing?
I find it very refreshing because, in contrast, I found it very disheartening to hear Trayvon's parents, I think Sean Bell's parents, somebody else's parents. Oh yeah, the Jordan Davis's mother. I find it very disheartening that a black parent of a unarmed murdered child who is a victim of an anomaly meaning that, well, anomaly is the wrong word, who are a victim of something that uniquely keeps on occurring just to black people, particularly black males, and not to nobody else, saying that there's no racial relationship to this. That was very distressing. So it was, and to me, it is a sign of fear and terror of reprise from white folks. So it was nice to see when black people go on and tell the truth. And it was clear in Michael Brown's parents from the very beginning, by the T-shirts the father wore and by comments that he made, that he wasn't going to play that very early in this whole thing. So yes, it's been very refreshing. And also Duncan's family regarding the Ebola death, it was very refreshing that they actually articulated a problem in this country. I think when black people stop denying racism when it's blatant, it will help us realize we have a common fight that we should unify around and collectively protect ourselves. And when we deny racism, we also deny ourselves the opportunity to collectivize ourselves in protection of the whole group. And then toward prosperity, political power, and all kinds of possibilities that we could benefit from if we thought more as a unit instead of being like Raven Simone, whatever her name is, Raven Simone said, not having no color and all this other kind of crazy stuff. That keeps us splintered, confused, and in doubt about our value as a people. Saying that racism occurs helps to give us clarity.
You're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast.
As it relates to the people of African descent around the world is mediocre at best. I had a lesson given to me in 1988. I happened to be called to New York. I had just done a pilot for a show called Frank's Place, the gentleman mentioned it. And the show was confusing a lot of people. I had the pleasure of being asked to come and see William Paley. He created CBS, and he's responsible for the format of news reporting on television. He looked at me and he asked me a question that changed my life that day about media. He said, "What is your propaganda?" I was blessed to be able to touch my brain and my lips to work them together. I said, "You don't know my culture." I said, "I have not seen my culture as I know it on television ever." I said, "There are people in a community that I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, that most people will never know." I said, "My show is designed to introduce to America a group of people with character that are just unbelievable." And he said, "Are you going to keep the writers?" I said, "The writers will stay." He says, "Well, I wish you well." Our business is dangerous. Why would a man who created what we call as television ask me, sitting in yellow pants, what is my propaganda? I've never forgotten that and will never forget that. It is propaganda that controls the minds and hearts of the masses. Using media to shape opinions and define culture. That's what your job is. And you can make a lot of money doing it. Or you can become a tool of the three corporations and fulfill their purpose.
Words from actor-director Tim Reid speaking to students at Jackson State University in Mississippi. Very recently, he was speaking to these students, journalism students at the college, and just offering, in my opinion, pearls of wisdom to them. And Cleo, in the previous segment, we talked about how, in some instances, the older generation doesn't really have anything noteworthy to say to the younger generation, so as a result that they don't listen. But here was an instance where someone of note from the older generation talking to our future leaders in that regard. Your thoughts on Reid giving back in that sense and having something important to say?
Well, Reid has always been one of these rare gems of pro-Black work, thinking, and activity for some time now. Interestingly enough, I think you may have described him as somebody who, while being part of the mainstream at some point, it's wonderful to see him doing what he's doing, but he's really not been on the scene for decades. I mean, WKRP, et cetera, was, what, 20 years ago? And a lot of the people in the younger generation overall don't know who he is.
Right, exactly. I'm sorry, and forgive me. You're absolutely right. And just for note and for clarity, let's kick his credentials, as they say. As you mentioned, WKRP in Cincinnati, he was known as the character Venus Flytrap. He did the very accomplished and very powerful television program Frank's Place, and then also directed the film Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. He has his own production company in Virginia, one of very few Black actors or directors who has his own production company. So Tim Reid is about it, and that's important. And the fact that he was speaking to the young people about it is also important.
Absolutely. And it's part of how he has always operated since I've known of him. He's been a gem of Black important, and his wife. I'm not sure what's going on with his wife anymore, but his wife was also once involved at his side doing this work on behalf of Black people.
Right.
But I think it's great. I mean, and you're right in that he's an example of a person of a formerly central generation who is now speaking to younger people and guiding them toward that same position with a pro-Black critical thinking lens.
Right. As you heard in the comments there, he asked the young people, and this is based on a conversation he had with the head of CBS television a few years back, when he was summoned to the office and the man asked him, "What's your propaganda?" Or in more relevant terms or tangible terms, "What's your purpose?" And as you heard, Reid had no problem saying he wanted his culture portrayed in a way he thought was important, or better yet, the way he knows his culture should be portrayed. That brings us to an interesting dynamic in terms of that, because during this conversation, Tim Reid brought up a name that I'm not sure too many people have ever heard of. I, in fact, had never heard of it, and forced me to do some research. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Saartjie Baartman. This was a Khoikhoi woman in 18th and 19th century in South Africa. This woman was exhibited as a freak show in Europe and sold in London in the 20s. Baartman was also known as a Hottentot Venus, quote unquote, with buttocks of enormous size and with genitalia fabled to be equally disproportionate. In the words of the New York Times, Baartman was a Black South African who was put on display for the amusement of Europeans at the beginning of the 18th century, of the 19th century. Quote unquote, when she arrived in London in 1810, this young woman from South Africa became an overnight sensation in London's theater of human oddities. Her body was the subject of prurient gaze, scientific fascination, and disturbed bewilderment. Now, Reid, in his talk to the young people, he juxtaposed that to today, in terms of the entertainment field today, and basically saying if you don't have a purpose, then everything else, you will just do anything to make money. And he's basically saying that your purpose, if clear on your purpose and committed to your purpose, money will follow. That's not going to be an issue. Money will follow, but be clear and true to your purpose. As a result, he says that some who don't have purpose have become modern-day Saartjie Baartmans. Now, out of complete respect, he used names such as Nicki Minaj. And as a result of that, clearly, he had something to say based on today's entertainers.
Well, yes. I was very moved by that report from you. I know her as Sarah Baartman. I didn't know the other name, but I'm very familiar with Sarah Baartman. And you may know that she was buried finally. Her remains were brought back to Azania and buried in August of 2002, about 13 years ago. So she is well known in some communities, medical communities, Black conscious communities, in terms of what happened to her and how she was objectified, chopped up, made into a piece of meat to showcase at the whims of white people in Europe. So yes, I think it's appropriate that what Mr. Reid said, and it's a very powerful association that he made.
Right, and you talked about in her death, because she died in her early 30s. They're not really sure of the time of birth, but she died in, I believe, 1815, December 29th, 1815. So as a result of that, at such a young age,
She was born in 1789.
Okay. So as a result of that, and again, this fascination that Europeans had with her body, they put it on display. So once she died, they took her remains and put it on, her skull, pieces of her body. They put that on display so people could come and see. This was in museums, so people can see it. But again, let's fast forward to now, and I think you'll agree that some of the stuff we see in terms of entertainment now, in terms of the free showing of the body, is a little over the top. And again, these are people who apparently will do anything for money, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's just how free they are with their bodies, and they're letting everyone else become free with it. But is there some other important message that should be taught from that?
Well, it frustrates me to talk about this without having the people that should hear it right in front of me, meaning our children, meaning Black females in particular, who, because I think that Mr. Reid's point, among his points, was that our women are putting themselves on display voluntarily, apparently, though it's being done for money, similar to Sarah Bartman. But his point is that, you're degrading yourself and you're kind of being foul in light of the legacy of Sarah Bartman and how she was put on display. And, as you just said, everything you just said, I think it's a very accurate and powerful comparison. And I hope young people where Tim spoke hear him and spread the message.
Okay, well, with that said, this week, the internet was supposed to break because Kim Kardashian decided to show parts of her body on the internet through through some paper magazine, I think it was called, to just show her body, and it was labeled as breaking the internet. Now, I don't like spending a great deal of time on people like Kim Kardashian because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, her claim to fame is based on a sex tape. So we need to immediately end that discussion. But nonetheless, I find there's an interesting dynamic. Well, hear me out just one second. There's an interesting dynamic playing before us because everyone's comfortable with what we saw. There was no one raising arms saying, "Yo, why we got to see her backside on the internet?" The internet is available to all sorts of people of all ages. Why must we see this? And I contrast it with what happened a few years back at the Super Bowl halftime when a frame of a body part of Janet Jackson's was portrayed, and everybody was calling CBS and had a problem with it. And I'm sure you feel that there are parts of Kim Kardashian that are not, shall we say, real.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least Janet Jackson's breast was real, I guess. But that picture that was used to show Kim Kardashian's backside, I got to say her name slowly because I'm so unfamiliar with her on an intimate level that I got to remember that name. Kim Kardashian. That image and that butt wasn't hers. It was an enhanced picture, and I don't know if you saw it or not, but the actual picture of her before it was enhanced was also released. I don't know how they got it, but the picture of her in that same pose before they doctored it up, it's a very different backside. So even the picture is phony, let alone allegedly her having so much phoniness.
Right, but what does all this mean? I mean, there's some more stuff at play there. I mean, again, as I said, everyone had an issue when they saw Janet Jackson. Folks were calling in, and now, as I said, a decade later, it's cool, laughing, ha ha ha, look at her.
This is an interesting juxtaposition, being that you mentioned this following a talk about Sarah Bartman, because ironically, this society still tries to debase and devalue Black people and Black people's images. And interestingly enough, the backside that Kim supposedly has and that J-Lo has looks like a traditional everyday butt that a whole lot of black women have. And it's like black women's bodies cannot be valued now unless it's on display on white terms, like Sarah Bartman. And other women, white women or whitish women, like what's her name, Kardashian, they get to show off body parts and have them praised that look like what black people have as a norm. So yes, there's a mixed message here. It's crazy, it's racist, and it's kind of the American way.
Right, and just getting back to Sarah Saartjie Baartman for a minute, that body was used back then. This is early 19th century world at that point. Her body was used to show the abnormal African body compared to the normal white body. So they were totally fascinated with that. And now there's still a level of fascination with it, but they want it now.
So what's similar, though, like back then and now, was that everything is still being done based on white terms. And interestingly enough, as I already said, the most fascinating part about Sarah was her butt from a white perspective. And now white women and non-black women, or non-directly black women, because frankly, Kim and J-Lo got some African in them somewhere, but they're not as African as Angela Bassett, who's close to 50, is still beautiful and has a butt that put all these butts to shame right now as we speak, but we don't hear about the beauty of her body.
Right. Is there a contradiction there, though, in terms of? Well, hear me out for a second. We want to avoid the objectifying of bodies. Is there some sort of a contradiction there? I mean, everyone wants to look good, but is there a contradiction there that these butts are on display? I mean, in terms of, and again, as I said, this was on the internet. Anyone has access to the internet. Anyone of any age can see this, and they can think that it's accepted, and then they can go acting out on their friends at school or other types of behavior. So is there a contradiction there?
Well, I don't know if there's a contradiction. There's a lot of mixed messaging, and there's a lot of sexualization of everything. I mean, twerking ain't nothing but somebody showing off their butt or showing off the butt they wish they had, like Miley Cyrus or somebody like that. But there's a lot of over-obsession and sexualization of everything. But again, not in ways that blatantly affirm who everybody is copying as the frame of reference, which is black people. And many times, at the risk of sounding redundant, people want to copy everything black people produce except our victimization and defeat.
On that note, we welcome you to join us in discussions regarding this podcast, Parallel Realities. You can email us at parallelrealitiespodcast@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook and also follow us on Twitter at Parallel Real. For Cleo Monago, I'm Anthony Harris. Thank you for listening.